The train groaned to a halt like an old animal dying in the dust. Its engine hissed, exhaling steam over a forgotten station nestled at the edge of nowhere. Paint peeled from the wooden platform, and the sun had long since bleached the sign overhead to an unreadable gray. The wind dragged across the prairie, lifting skirts of dry grass, tugging at a lone figure seated beneath that brittle sign. She sat upright in a dress too fine for this land. Lace yellowed, veil clutched in gloved hands worn thin by time. Her age showed in the way her shoulders refused to slump despite the long wait, in the softness of her jowls and the proud arch of her brow. A bouquet rested in her lap, wilting hour by hour beneath the unkind sun. Her boots barely touched the wood slats beneath her, not from frailty but discipline. She had not moved since morning. The passengers filed off the train, casting curious glances that quickly turned away. A man coughed. A woman whispered. No one spoke to her. She had arrived yesterday. Each hour since it folded over her like the closing of a book. She watched the track, listened for hoofbeats, believed in the slow return of footsteps promised in a letter, ink now faded, but memorized like prayer. Asterisk wait at the station. I will meet you there. I'll bring a preacher and a promise. Asterisk. She held to that, because what else remained? A fly circled the bouquet, then died beneath her glove. She did not flinch. The wind picked up. Her spine, though aching, did not bend. Atop a ridge above the station, a rider paused beneath a crooked juniper. His horse shifted, sending the wind. A girl rode with him, bare-legged and wild-haired, maybe 10. She pointed toward the woman in white. Why is she dressed like that? The girl asked, squinting into the distance. The man didn't answer at first. He had seen the figure from afar for 2 days now, unmoving, a pale smudge against the scorched station. He knew desperation when he saw it. He also knew ceremony. He'd buried enough of it. Maybe she's waiting on someone too late to come, he said finally. The girl frowned. She looks like she came from a story. He nudged his horse down the ridge. Let's get feed. Then we'll see. By the time they reached the platform, the sun was already falling behind the mesa, dragging long shadows over the rails. Dust whispered through the air. The station master, an old man with shaky hands and no heart for trouble, locked the office door and gave the bride one last glance before vanishing into his quarters. She remained seated. The rancher dismounted slowly. His coat was worn at the elbows. He didn't wear a gun that showed, but his boots were caked in dry blood from a calf lost that morning. He approached her like she was a creature too proud to spook, nodding his head instead of speaking. The girl stayed on her pony, staring with wide eyes. You waiting on someone? The man asked. The woman turned, slowly. Her eyes were steel-colored, rimmed red, but dry. She nodded once. They late? He said gently. They're not coming, she replied. The wind creaked the sign overhead. Somewhere, a coyote howled like a question no one dared answer. He didn't offer comfort. He didn't insult her with pity. He only said, You can't sleep out here. I have nowhere else. Got a spare bunkhouse, he said after a pause. Roof don't leak. My girl gets jittery around strangers, but you look like you won't break things. I won't. He offered a hand. She didn't take it. Instead, she stood with slow dignity and followed, gathering her dress so the lace wouldn't catch on the step. The ride was long and silent, across a plain split by shadow and the scent of cooling sage. The woman rode side saddle behind the girl, arms around the child's waist like it was nothing more than a courtesy. She didn't speak, even as night fell and the stars came like embers overhead. The girl, nestled between old grief and new curiosity, looked back once. What's your name? The woman smiled faintly, as if the question surprised her. It doesn't matter much anymore, she said. But once I liked the way it sounded when someone spoke it soft. That answer seemed enough. When they reached the ranch, it wasn't a grand thing, just fence rails, a cracked porch, and the smell of horses and ash. The man dismounted first, lit the lantern on the post, and pointed her toward a bunkhouse with its own stoop and a pot of water waiting. Only for the night, he said. Of course, she replied, though her voice trembled like she'd never expected even that much. The girl yawned and vanished inside. The man lingered, watching the woman hesitate before entering her quarters. He had the sense she wasn't used to thresholds. That crossing them always came at a cost. "Folks around here might talk if they see you tomorrow," he said, not unkindly. "I've heard worse than talk," she replied, then turned. "And if they do, let them remember I was left in white, but I didn't die there." She shut the door behind her with quiet finality. He stood a moment longer. The wind carried no answer, just the creak of wood and the rasp of dry grass. Inside the bunkhouse, the woman removed the veil, folded it carefully, set the bouquet down beside the basin, and washed her face. In the cracked mirror, she saw a stranger, yet one who had survived something holy and harrowing. She climbed into the narrow bed and lay on her side, eyes open to the flicker of lantern light through the slats. The rancher stood outside, watching the stars. He didn't know her name, didn't know her story, but something in her silence spoke of wounds that matched his own. A train had brought her here, but it wasn't the train that kept her going. And by morning, neither of them would be strangers. At first light, the prairie hummed with a quiet rhythm, whispers of wind brushing the dry grass, the soft clatter of a pail, the distant murmur of horses shifting in the corral. She rose before the rooster, as she always had, and swept the bunkhouse floor until the dust no longer swirled in the air. The dress she'd worn at the station now hung beside the door, laced limp and gray with road dust. In its place, she wore a plain brown skirt and a blouse that smelled faintly of cedar. Her back ached, but she stood straight. The rancher found her at the stove, stirring beans like it was the most natural thing in the world. She'd already split wood, started the fire, and boiled water for coffee. She didn't look up when he stepped into the kitchen, but the soft lift of her chin acknowledged his presence. "You didn't have to do all this," he said. She tasted the beans, added pepper. "Habit," was all she said. The girl crept in barefoot, hair tangled, eyes still fogged from sleep. She paused when she saw the woman, like the memory of the night before needed daylight to settle. The woman turned, offered a small smile, and pushed a tin plate across the table. The girl hesitated, then took it, mumbling a soft thank you that didn't escape her father's ears. He chewed slowly, studying the stranger with eyes trained to read horses in storms. She moved like someone who had lived among fire, careful, deliberate, never wasteful. When she finally sat, it wasn't with the ease of belonging, but with the grace of someone learning where she might fit. By noon, she'd fixed a latch on the chicken coop and stitched the girl's fraying hem without asking permission. She didn't pry, didn't press. She only offered herself to the rhythm of the place, like someone who understood the cost of idleness. In town, they noticed. By the third day, whispers drifted through the general store like smoke under a door. Old Miss Beringer said she'd seen her at the station, dressed like some ghost bride. Mr. Calder mumbled about con artists. A man named Flint, who carried a badge and bitterness in equal measure, squinted toward the ranch with narrowed eyes and said, "Don't take much to trick a lonely man." But she didn't visit town. She stayed where the earth was dry and honest, and nothing lied except the sky before storm. One evening, the rancher found her mending tack in the barn. He leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, watching her hands work the leather with patient strength. "You don't ask for much," he said. "I've never had much to ask for," she replied without looking up. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full of things unsaid. When she finally glanced at him, there was no fear, only something like wariness. He had the look of a man who kept his grief packed tight beneath his ribs, and she had no wish to pry it loose. "You got family?" he asked softly. "I buried them long before I ever boarded that train." He nodded once. "I know that feeling." His voice held no pity, just recognition, like two people who had stood on the same broken porch, watching the same storm roll in. Later that night, the girl ran a fever. It hit sudden. One minute she was picking wildflower by the fence. The next she was curled up and burning beneath her quilts. Her father's hands trembled as he soaked rags, muttered curses under his breath. Panic bloomed beneath his calm, like blood beneath a white shirt. The woman moved fast. She boiled roots and ground dried petals with the bottom of a coffee cup. She soaked linens in sage water, placed leaves beneath the girl's tongue, whispered of fever like it might listen if spoken to gently. The rancher stood back at first, helpless in his own home, heart caught between fear and the need to trust. "Where'd you learn all that?" he asked, hoarse. "My mother was a healer," she said, brushing damp hair from the girl's brow. "She taught me to listen before I speak, even to sickness." By dawn, the fever broke. The girl opened her eyes slowly, blinking as though waking from deep water. Her gaze found the woman first. Her hand reached out, not for her father, but for the one who'd sat beside her bed all night. The rancher saw it, said nothing, but his breath caught in a way that said everything. That morning, the woman washed her hands in the trough and looked out over the fields. The land stretched endlessly, harsh and gold, yet something in it had softened. She didn't ask to stay. She didn't need to. The place had made room around her, not like a guest, but like a tree grown crooked that still found sunlight. She walked up the hill behind the barn that evening, led by something unspoken. There, beneath a wind-warped tree, stood 3 wooden markers. Simple, unadorned. She knelt and laid a wildflower at their base. The rancher stood at the bottom of the hill, watching her. "That was her spot," he said quietly. "My girl's mother. We used to sit up there when the moon was full. She taught me the Comanche names for the stars." The woman turned, eyes full of the kind of sorrow only someone who's carried her own markers could understand. "She was lucky to be loved here," she said. He nodded. "And I was lucky she gave me a reason to stay alive after." They walked back in silence. That night, they ate stew together in the glow of lantern light. The girl leaned against the woman's side, tired but steady. The rancher filled her bowl without asking. Outside, the wind picked up. Coyotes called across the ridge. The woman listened, then said softly, "They're warning about change." He looked at her sharply. "You believe that?" "I believe in listening. Sometimes the land speaks louder than people." He leaned back, studied her with a long gaze. Then, without ceremony, said, "Stay, as long as you like." She met his eyes. "I might stay longer than that." He smiled, not the kind that showed teeth, but the kind that meant something had cracked open and light had gotten in. The girl pulled the woman's shawl tighter around herself and whispered, "Can I call you something other than ma'am?" The woman hesitated, then nodded. "Then tell me what I should be," she said. The girl grinned, already dreaming. And just beyond the window, the prairie darkened, waiting to see what name she would answer to next. The letter arrived on the back of a bay horse and a lie. Dust trailed behind the rider as he entered town, saddle creaking beneath his weight. His coat bore no badge, but he carried himself like a man who wore one once and thought the memory still mattered. He passed through the livery, past old men spitting tobacco beneath the porch, and rode straight up to the post shack with a letter gripped tight between 2 fingers like a threat disguised as paper. It bore her name. She didn't go into town to collect it. Hadn't since the night she laid wildflowers on a stranger's grave and found herself tethered to something more solid than her past. The rancher brought it home in the crook of his hand, dirt still on his boots, blood still drying on his knuckles from wrangling a bull too stubborn for its own good. He set the envelope on the table between them, then sat without a word. She stared at it like it might hiss. The handwriting was unmistakable, slanted, arrogant. The name spelled in full, no warmth, no fondness, just possession. She didn't touch it. He poured coffee, waited. At last, she opened it. The first line made her hands tremble. By the fourth, her breath caught like a fishhook in the throat. The man who'd left her at the station claimed he'd been ambushed, robbed of money and sense. "I never meant to leave you," he wrote. "You're still my wife by proxy. Come back, and we'll make it right." The woman read it twice, then once more, and laid it down gently, like one might return a blade to its sheath. Across the table, the rancher said nothing, but the lines around his eyes tightened. His daughter sat by the hearth, stitching a worn doll, unaware of the history sliding back into the room like smoke. "You believe him?" he asked. She shook her head. "I believe he meant to own me. That was always his way." "Is that how he got you to come out west?" She met his gaze. There was no shame in her eyes, only history. "I was tired of being invisible. His letter sounded like a door I hadn't knocked on before. The rancher took a slow sip, then looked out the window. "He's coming," she said. "That much I can feel." He nodded. I felt it too. By the end of the week, the town knew. Rumors rolled like thunderclouds. They said she was already married, that she'd seduced the rancher for his land, that the daughter called her mama when she didn't deserve the name. Flint, the man with old authority and no patience, made sure the whisper spread fast. At the general store, no one looked her in the eye. Even the girl's Comanche uncle, who rarely spoke to white folks, kept a distant silence when he rode by the fence. She cleaned the house anyway, cooked supper, darned socks, read to the girl at night from a Bible missing half its pages. She did not run. She had run enough in her life. The man who wrote the letter arrived on a Sunday, came in a black coat and polished boots, riding a silver mare too clean for this country. He dismounted with a swagger born from cheap confidence and worse intentions. She stood on the porch when he approached. The girl hid behind the door. The rancher leaned against the post, shotgun resting easy in his hand, not aimed but present. "Well," the man said, smiling like he thought his charm hadn't curdled, "you look good for a widow." "I was never your wife," she said. "You signed the papers. We made an agreement. You sent a letter. That's not the same as a vow." He stepped closer. "You owe me, woman. I paid for your passage, bought you a future. You think you can just plant yourself here and pretend you belong?" The rancher's voice cut through the air like flint on steel. "She does belong." The man turned, sneering. "You got no claim on her." "Don't need one," the rancher said. "She's not land." The woman stepped forward, eyes sharp as broken glass. "You left me to rot in a dress with no name and no ring. I built a life from the ashes of your cowardice." He reached into his coat. Too slow to be a gun, too deliberate to be kind. Paper. He held it up like a verdict. "Legal proof. Marriage by proxy. You're mine, whether you like it or not. I'll take it to the law." Behind him, Flint stepped from the shadows, badge gleaming faintly in the evening light. "That's the law," the man said, gesturing. Flint nodded. "Paper's clean. Says she's his." The girl burst from the doorway, voice trembling. "She's not his. She's ours." Flint scoffed. "Kids don't get a say." The woman stepped off the porch. The rancher didn't stop her. She walked right up to the man who tried to claim her and took the paper from his hand. Then, calm as sunrise, she struck a match against the porch beam and lit the corner. The flames curled up the edge, devouring ink and promise in equal measure. She dropped the burning paper at his feet. "I came west to be someone new, and I found a name I wasn't given. I earned it." The man flinched. "You'll regret this." "No," she said. "I regretted waiting. Not anymore." He turned to go, fury stiff in his shoulders, but Flint lingered. "You'll be hearing from the court," he muttered. The rancher raised his shotgun just slightly. "You come back with paper. Bring a coffin, too." The lawman paled, followed the suitor back toward town. When they were gone, the woman's knees gave slightly. She steadied herself on the porch rail. The girl ran to her, wrapping thin arms around her waist. The rancher watched her like a man who'd seen lightning strike, and waited to hear if it started a fire. "You burned a marriage contract," he said. She looked up, eyes gleaming. "I kept the only vow that mattered." His mouth twitched, almost a smile. Then he offered her his hand, not out of pity, not out of possession, but as an equal. She took it. Behind them, the prairie wind picked up. Storm clouds gathered like a promise. And somewhere in town, a fire had just begun. The wind shifted days before trouble came. It carried the smell of rain where no clouds yet hung, and the horses grew restless in their stalls. Fence posts groaned louder than usual, as if the land itself was bracing for something. She felt it before she saw it, just as she had always felt approaching pain, the way old scars flare before the storm. The girl clung closer those evenings, her laughter dulled, her gaze watchful. The rancher mended the fence with his jaw set tight, saying little. They all knew something unfinished was circling back. On the fourth night, When the sun dipped low and bled across the horizon, the suitor returned. But this time he didn't come alone. 3 men rode with him. 2 strangers with hard eyes and quiet guns, and Flint, still hiding behind a badge that no longer meant anything to anyone but himself. Their silhouettes cut black against the copper dusk, hooves drumming up dust as they came up the path like a slow-moving funeral. The woman stood on the porch, shotgun already in her hands. The rancher stepped beside her without a word. The girl was nowhere in sight. Flint raised a hand as if they were guests, not threats. "We've come for what's rightfully his. You've made your choice, but the law's the law." "There's no law here," the rancher said, voice cold as creekstone. "Just men with papers and greed." The suitor grinned, confident now, as if muscle on either side of him granted righteousness. "You had your fun playing wife," he said to her, "but you don't get to steal a man's property and call it freedom." "I'm not property," she said. He ignored her. "I've got a claim and witnesses. That land's half hers by marriage, which makes it half mine. I'm here to take what's owed." The rancher's hand tightened on his rifle. The woman stepped forward before he could lift it. "You came here thinking I was weak," she said, voice steady, low. "You think a letter makes you a husband, and a signature makes you a man." He reached into his coat, and time slowed. But from the edge of the ridge, 3 new riders emerged, silent, proud, faces painted with the earth. The girl sat on the lead pony, hair braided tight, eyes fierce beneath the storm-colored sky. She had gone for her mother's people. The Comanche riders said nothing as they approached. They needed no words. Their presence was enough to stall the hands of the men below. One of the hired guns dismounted, dropped his weapon in the dirt, and backed away. The other hesitated, then followed. The suitor's bravado faltered, though his pride did not. "You gonna shoot me over some washed-up woman?" he said, sneering at the rancher. "She's nothing but what I left her." "She's everything you never deserved," the rancher replied. And then the woman stepped down from the porch, boots crunching against dry earth. She didn't raise her gun. She didn't shout. She looked the man in the eyes and said, "You want what's owed?" He blinked, confused, nodded, "Then take it." She held out her hand, palm up. The suitor stepped forward, uncertain, reaching for what he thought might be surrender. She struck him across the face with the butt of the shotgun, once clean, final. He dropped to his knees, bleeding from the mouth, stunned silent. She didn't hit him again. She didn't have to. "You left me at a station in a dress," she said, breathing hard. "I built a home with these hands. I tended the sick. I cooked and I fought and I stayed. You don't get to take that from me." He spat blood into the dirt. "You'll pay for this." "No," she said. "I already did. I paid every mile west, every cold night alone. And I earned every minute since." Flint shifted in the saddle, eyeing the Comanche riders, then the shotgun still cradled in the rancher's arms. "Call it," the rancher said. Flint hesitated, then turned his horse. "It's a civil dispute. Don't see no crime here." The suitor stayed kneeling, hands clenched, as the others rode off without him. He didn't beg, didn't speak, just sat in the dust as the prairie wind turned against him. When he finally stumbled away on foot, none of them watched him go. That night, the rain finally came. The 3 of them sat by the fire, man, woman, child, wrapped in warmth and silence. The girl leaned into the woman's side, fingers curled in the hem of her shawl. The rancher poured coffee and handed it to the woman with a nod that spoke more than thanks. His wound from a week before it scabbed over, but his trust had opened. There was no ceremony, no proposal, just presence. She sipped quietly, looking out through the window at the soaked earth beyond. The graves on the ridge glistened with rain. The porch sagged beneath its years, but the walls held. The roof didn't leak, and something permanent had taken root in her. "You could have let him win," the rancher said softly. "I've let too many men walk away thinking they'd won." He smiled, slow and genuine. The girl tugged at her sleeve. "You gonna stay forever?" She looked down at the small face turned up toward her. Something inside her, long, brittle, and aching, softened with heat. "Forever's a mighty long time," she said. "But," the girl insisted, The woman reached over, brushed a strand of wet hair from the child's brow. But I reckon this is the first place I've wanted to. Outside, the wind settled. Rain whispered against the glass like a promise kept. And on the ridge, beneath a tree split by lightning long ago, the land exhaled. The past had not been buried, but had been named and left behind.